Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Steve Forbes, former presidential candidate and chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. We caught up with Steve in the halls of the JW Marriott in Washington, D.C., prior to his delivering the keynote address at the annual CEI dinner. Steve, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Bill. Thank you.
Steve, with all the crazy talk being thrown around this election season, mired as we are in a zero-growth economy that we're being told is a new normal, I asked you on to give us a refresher on how to fix what's broken. Your latest book, titled Reviving America, makes no bones about it. What are the three biggest problems we need to most urgently address?
Well, we have a lot of problems which you have to prioritize, and if you do these big three, which involve health care, the Federal Reserve, and the tax code, you'll see this economy take off like a rocket. What's been remarkable about this whole election season is how content-free it's been. These issues have been hardly addressed at all. Yes, candidates put out various proposals, but very few led with them in a way that people felt, okay, you're going to get it done the way Ronald Reagan did in 1980 when he talked about a 30% across-the-board cut in income tax rates.
But it's not about substance now. It's about style, isn't it?
Well, that's because the candidates let it happen. I sometimes fantasize of bringing back Joe Stalin for 5 minutes and have him shoot all the consultants, political consultants, for giving candidates, and then the candidates themselves are taking this bum advice of leading with glib generalities and not getting to substance. The big three involve health care, having patient control of health care. We've got to get rid of Obamacare, but what do we replace it with? The tax code, recognize this current code is beyond redemption. And then in terms of money, having stable money. Changing the value of money is about as foolish and destructive as changing the number of ounces in a pound and think you're going to deal with obesity that way.
Let's take these one at a time. And let's start with health care. Medical errors have become the third leading cause of death in America behind cancer and heart disease. It's as if a jumbo jet crashed every day of the week. Considering all this carnage, why has this issue attracted so little attention?
It's amazing. When a restaurant is found to be guilty of food poisoning, it's a national story. Chipotle.
Yeah.
Thankfully, no one was killed, but scores of people were hit with it, and it was an ongoing story that nearly destroyed the company. One of the recommendations we make in the book in terms of transparency is having hospitals post each month how many patients die of infections received after they're admitted to the hospital. It's scandalous, tens of thousands of people a year. But as you note, it gets very little attention. And this all goes to the whole problem with health care is we don't have real free markets in health care. The real customers are insurance companies, government, and employers. Hospitals know their revenue depends not on pleasing the patient as much on pleasing the paymasters, which is primarily government and big insurance companies. And so the proof of it is the crummiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with somebody else with a curtain in between and that other person being sick.
We consider it normal.
In the hospital, oh, okay. Do what the boarding houses did 200 years ago, put everyone in a bed, No.
Yeah, markets don't do that. Only government planning does that. I mean, Medicare was created so the elderly wouldn't have to spend such a large portion of their limited income on health care. Has it achieved that goal?
No. As a matter of fact, the elderly now spend a little more of their income on health care than they did back in 1965. And what Medicare has done, most people who go on Medicare say, oh, it's great. You just go in, show your card, blah, blah, blah. But what it's done is hurt innovation. When you have a top-down system, third-party system, things get frozen. What was done in 1965 was still done in 1985, which is why Medicare is very slow on innovations, which is why you didn't have physicians doing medical records, which every dry cleaner in the country has done for decades, because it freezes. Government does what is there at the time. And since there's no pressure to change because somebody else comes along with something better, things get stuck in the place.
Plus, with centrally set prices, there's no signaling mechanism to tell people where the innovation should be directed.
Well, this is why you need another reform of having hospitals and clinics post prices for all their products and services and treatments. The proof of how crazy the system is, because we've grown up with it, we don't realize how strange it is. You go to a clinic or hospital and you ask in advance what a treatment's going to cost, get a very strange look. It means one of two things. Either you're uninsured or you're a lunatic.
Right.
Why would you want to know the price? What's it to you? Oh, insurance will take care of it. We'll tell you later what you owe.
Yep.
They want you to be passive. In no other part of the economy would we allow that to happen.
What kind of innovation and price improvement have we seen in those tiny segments of the healthcare market that are not heavily regulated?
Well, you see it all the time with the classic cases of LASIK surgery for the eyes. Costs less today than it did 10 or 12 years ago with a better result. You have cosmetic surgery, huge booming industry, increased sevenfold in 20 years, huge technological innovations. You haven't had the inflation there. Why? Because unless the result of disease or accident, it's between you and the provider. So you scope it out.
It's a cash business.
And so, if you have friends who keep their mouth shut, you get advice from them in terms of a procedure. And you go and do it. And so the system thrives. And you see little pieces of what can happen in delivery of health care. Once upon a time, if you wanted a flu shot, you made an appointment with a clinic or a hospital or a doctor. It was a big deal. Today, you can get it anywhere.
You walk into CVS.
You can walk in CVS. You can go to the airport, go to a gas station, say, fill her up, give you a flu shot, do the windshield, and on your way. Those are the kind of glimpses of what can happen if you get real free markets, and it doesn't preclude effective safety nets. After all, food, which is more basic than health care, you've got safety nets there. Why can't we do the same thing in health care?
Given how cheap plane tickets are compared to major medical treatments, do you think we'll see rapid growth in offshore cash and carry healthcare services beyond the reach of U.S. regulators?
Well, what you call medical tourism is going to be more and more of a thriving industry. I was in Panama recently. Johns Hopkins has a facility there. Johns Hopkins is not your back alley fly-by-night.
Right. It's a good brand.
And you can go there and get procedures done. They have flowers in the room. They treat you like it was a spa. Everyone is unhappy with healthcare today. You go to the hospital. Even if it's a great hospital, you wonder, do the specialists talk to each other? Do the hospitals talk to each other? And it's bad enough being there, of course, but it's unnerving when you feel that who's connecting the dots? Who's in charge?
Let's move on to taxes, which is the second big issue you address in your book. You've been calling for a flat tax since I first met you when you ran for president 20 years ago. Since then, we've seen a number of other countries give it a try. What have we learned from their experience?
Well, what we've learned, and over 40 countries and jurisdictions have done it, is that it works. That having a simple low rate, not only do you get a more vibrant economy, but you also get better tax collections because simple is easier. The thing to remember about the flat tax is the opportunity costs in this country. Our IRS estimates we spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. Experts tell us we spend $200 billion a year complying with this monstrosity. Just go back 20 years. Imagine for all those tens of billions of hours, literally trillions of dollars, all that immense brain power had been going for new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases, how much better life would be. It's a scandal that we, as a free people, spend so much time on something so complex, so corrupt, and absolutely unnecessary.
Describe the flat tax version you've been recommending.
Throw the code out. It's beyond redemption. I'd say bury it, but I'm not sure the EPA would allow you to do it. And replace with a simple 17% rate. You'd have generous exemptions for adults and children. A family of four, for example, the first $52,800 of salary free of federal income tax. No tax on savings, no death taxes. You should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS. Do the same thing on the business side. Reduce the rate from 35, one of the worst in the world. Get it down to 17. And have instant expensing of capital expenditures. And you could literally do your tax return on a single sheet of paper or a few keystrokes on a computer.
What would happen to the economy if we went that way?
It would go berserkly upward. People could focus their time and energies on productive things. And they say, well, what about revenues, government revenues? First, the government's supposed to serve us, not the other way around. Put that aside for a moment. We show that in 3 or 4 years the lines cross in terms of more revenue coming in as all this investment kicks in.
Because of the growth.
Because of the growth and the investment and the more productivity. People start to move up the income ladder. This is great for low-income people starting out, middle-income people who want to improve their lot in life. And so you would have a more vibrant economy. And then the question would become, what's the government going to do with its extra revenues? Well, I would want to cut the rate more, but that would be a nice debate to have.
But could you get people on the left to support it based on the idea that they might someday have more money to spend?
The opposition really is ideological in terms of, first, if you like big government, you love a progressive income tax system. Why? Because if you get a raise of 10%, you get kicked into a higher tax bracket, which means the government growth is 15%. So government's always one step ahead of you, because the more you succeed, the government succeeds even more. It gets a greater proportion of your income. It breeds corruption, brings out the worst in us. And so half the lobbying in Washington revolves around the federal income tax code.
Sure. Why is a flat tax better than a consumption tax?
A flat tax is better than consumption tax because, one, you can get it done right away. A consumption tax, if you want to put in a new tax, you must repeal the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which allows Washington to impose the income tax. Otherwise, I guarantee you'll end up what most countries have and what most states have, and that is both an income tax and a sales tax.
And a VAT.
VAT, which is even more insidious because you don't see it. Prices go up, you blame the merchant, not the government jacking up the VAT rate, value-added tax rate.
What are the politics of passing a flat tax in the U.S.?
The politics are against it because complexity is a source of power, and it's a source of enrichment. Anytime you want something, you got to go, member of the Ways and Means Committee. I want to change this. I want to protect myself from that. That's why if you want the ultimate utopia in this town, you sit on the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee. You say, I think I'll have a reception tonight. Every lobbyist comes with the check. I got to have access. So it's going to take both public opinion. This is where I was disappointed that candidates didn't lead with this. Some candidates this year had some interesting ideas on the flat tax, but they didn't lead with it forcefully. And you have to have the president pushing it. If you don't have the executive branch, the energy of the executive branch, it won't happen. And here's where the opportunity is. If we elect a president who is interested in it, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, former chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, very interested in radical tax reform, you could get a very good tax bill. Because unlike previous House leadership, this leadership is interested in things like policy. Imagine that.
Let's move on to the third big issue you raise in your book. When it comes to monetary policy, the world seems to be in uncharted territory. While quantitative easing, zero interest rate, and now even negative interest rate policies seem to have buoyed stock markets, there's a sense of impending doom across large swaths of the investor community. Are we on the brink of some sort of global monetary and stock market system crash?
It's not so much the danger of a crash as the almost more debilitating idea that you have walking pneumonia, you can't get rid of it. It's acidic. It keeps eating at us. It's not one big event and then it's over. It just goes on and on and on. And that's why I think you have the political environment you have today, not to mention in other countries. People feel, why are we stuck in this rut? Who's responsible for it? So you look for scapegoats. The thing about money, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. It's not like 50 Shades of Grey. But if you don't get the money right, you're going to have a troubled economy. Why? Because money makes it easier for us to do transactions, buy and sell with each other. That's how we improve our lot in life, get a higher standard of living. We can focus on what we do best. And money makes that easier rather than barter. Barter is very cumbersome. But money has to have a stable value. Just as when you buy a gallon of gasoline, you assume the gallon is the same today as it was yesterday. It'll be the same tomorrow. Buy a pound of cheese, same thing, 16 ounces. That doesn't change each day. Just imagine one moment, play a mind game. Federal Reserve is put in time of the Time Bureau. Decides to float the clock. Say if 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes the next, 96
and
minutes the day after.
And you're not sure what's going to be a month from now.
And so you have to have futures on time. So you want to bake a cake, it says bake the batter 30 minutes. You have to figure out, is that nominal minutes, inflation-adjusted minutes? Is it DC minute, a Mexican minute? You say that would be absurd, but that's what we do with money, unstable money. It's why we have this rotten economy. It's risky enough to make an investment, but if you don't know what you're going to get paid back in, it's going to be a 100-cent dollar, 50-cent dollar, 10-cent dollar.
And you got to build that in. You've been very consistent recommending a return to some kind of gold standard that would eliminate discretionary monetary policy. Are others starting to take up that call, or are you still a voice in the wilderness?
I think people are recognizing that the gold standard is the way to go. And even though the numbers are still small, the even bigger trend, which is how you get big change, is recognizing that what we're doing now is not working. When you have Paul Volcker and others saying what we're doing now is not working, that's the first step to have people start to debate, okay, what do we do next? And the thing about a gold standard, it's not using gold coins or stuff like that. Gold keeps its value better than anything else. When you see the price change, that's the dollar's value changing, not gold changing. Gold keeps its consistent value, so it's the best way of keeping the money consistent in value. And to say that gold will restrict the economy is like saying 12 inches in a foot restricts the size of a building you wish to construct. No, just means you have a measure on terms of buying and selling. Money measures value the way scales measure weight. You want it to be consistent. Markets work when you have fixed weights and measures. Works when you have fixed money. We did it for 180 years, and it worked.
It did work for a long time, didn't it? If we do experience some sort of calamity like we did in 2008, would that increase or decrease the interest in the gold standard?
That's one reason why we wrote this book. We saw after 2008, because they didn't know what to do, they did some very bad things. And what we want to do now is set the stage, what you might call the idea stage, so that if things go wrong, okay, this is where we can go. Disaster does not guarantee you're going to do things right. In the aftermath of disaster, we saw that in the 30s, we saw it in the part of the 70s, we see it after 2008.
Yep.
So you got to get the right ideas out there. And that's one reason why we did this book. And when people realize things are not going right, okay, here's the way to go.
In case of calamity, break glass, read Steve's book.
That sounds good.
If the U.S. doesn't step up to serious monetary reform, either in a crisis or otherwise, could a country like China leap into the void and take over?
There's no copyright in the world of ideas. And so if China wants to go to a gold standard, if Russia wants to go to a gold standard, if Brazil, now in desperate condition, decides inflation's not a great idea, goes to a gold standard, of course they could do it. And the Chinese have actually studied this. They've done some real work.
Aren't they looking at setting up their own market to fix gold price?
They're looking at ways of doing gold. They've talked to people like Robert Mundell, so they're in an exploration stage now in terms of, okay, how do we do it? And one of the things I hope they learn is you don't need a big pile to do it. You just have to know what you're doing. The Brits did not have a big pile of gold, but they knew what they were doing. We didn't. We blew up the previous system because of our ignorance.
If you were to transition to some sort of a gold standard or a gold price rule or a pegging standard, how would you do it in a way to minimize disruption?
The announcement would take care of the disruption fairly quickly.
Price it in.
People, if they'd start to price it in. If they knew that a date certain, 6 months, 12 months from now, we're going on it. It was like in 1975 when they had May Day, when they did away with fixed commissions on Wall Street. Everyone knew that it was coming. And so if you know that it's coming, then you make the adjustments in ways that you can't plan in advance. The key thing is it's going to happen.
So the markets need some kind of certainty before they can start planning.
Markets can adjust if they know what the rules are.
So, Steve, in the time we have left, what advice would you give to the small investor looking to protect his assets from what could be a pretty serious financial discontinuity coming?
Let's look at gold. You don't look at gold as an investment. You look at it as an insurance policy. You hope you don't have to use it, but you know if something bad happens, you got something that'll keep its value where everything else is going kablooey. So gold is an insurance policy. And if it stays stable in terms of dollar prices, that's great because it means they're actually starting to do something right.
Yeah, that's a happy time. Your house didn't burn down. You didn't need the insurance.
Exactly. This is where gold is an insurance policy. And then in terms of investing, just realize emotions are your enemy. You're going to get whipsawed. So if you have the inner Buffett and you want to play the market, fine. But with your retirement money, just make those consistent contributions. If you don't have time to do your own research, do a couple of cheap index funds. Make those payments, and over time, you'll do just fine.
Steve, thanks so much for your wisdom. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Good to be with you, Bill. Thank you.
That was Steve Forbes, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at RealClearMarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. To make sure you don't miss any of our shows, stop by RealClearRadio.org and sign up for updates. Build your brand by aligning it with high-quality content on Real Clear Radio Hour. For corporate underwriting opportunities, contact producer at realclearradio.org. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a boutique property management company in Boston's South End. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.